Excluded my brother's entitled stepdaughter from our annual family trip. Now my family accuses me of being as bad as her mother. I, 35F, live and work abroad but am from the Midwest. I grew up with my brother Jason, 43 male, and our parents, 70s. We were working class, had what we needed but not well off by any means. When I was in high school, Jason married Tiffany, 40F, who is and was and will always be a mess of a person, heavy drinker, partier, God knows whatever else, but she was hot. And my brother is a dweeb, to put it nicely. They had Jace, 19 meters, Jeff, 17 meters, and Hannah, 12F. Their marriage broke down before Hannah was born. They tried working it out but ultimately got divorced. Jason started dating Jenny, 43F, while splitting custody of the kids with Tiffany 50-50. Since Tiff had been a SOM, she received child support and alimony, and my brother worked a lot. I liked Jenny at first. She wasn't a complete smoke show like Tiff, but she was kind, had a good job, and was well educated. I thought, much better match. At first, I know Jenny was upset that the kids didn't immediately love her and call her mom when they were there, and the divorce was hard on them. Got pregnant somewhat fast with Daisy, 10F, and they got married. Around this time, the older kids started refusing to go back to Tiff's. She was always drinking and having guys around, so all three moved in full-time with Jason and Jenny, and Tiff left town and is no longer in the kids' lives. I tried being understanding. I'm sure having a newborn and then 3 older kids full-time is difficult. But Jenny completely changed. She stopped working, but declared she was only a SOM to her kid. Jason was working 70+ hours to make ends meet and her parents were helping them out, but she controls the finances. This means that the 3 of them, Jason, Jenny, and Daisy, operate as a family unit, going to dinners, events, even vacations, and leaving the older 3 kids at home. I have always thought this was disgusting and voiced my opinion about it, but Jason just said his divorce broke him emotionally and he will do anything possible to keep Jenny happy so that their marriage works out. Gross, yes. And 10 years ago, to be frank, I was younger, broker, and dumber, so it was kind of more like, yes, my brother fucking sucks as a dad, but I live on another continent and all I can do is be supportive of the kids. I know, not a great attitude in retrospect, and I'm disappointed in myself. I really did my best. When they refused to pay for Jace to learn how to drive, even though Jenny refused to drive the kids anywhere, my mom taught him and I bought him a used car. We had to shame Jason to put him on his insurance, and he makes Jace pay for it. Same with Jeff. They share the car and use it for their activities, and Hannah's, my wife, an only child and we don't want children, have the 3 of them as our sole beneficiaries in our will, something we did when we found out that Jenny and Jason planned to leave them only the bare minimum amount. Everything goes to Daisy. Also, after we got married, my wife, 6 years ago, and I decided that we would start taking the older kids on annual trips with us when we went to the US. Nothing fancy, we might be child-free but we're not billionaires or anything, just well off, but things like a week in Florida, Utah, California, things like that. They're very outdoorsy kids, so they've had a blast every year, and we plan it when my brother takes Jenny and Daisy on trips, so they don't care. Normally we vacation in the summer, but Jace got an internship this summer, so we decided to move our trip to the fall and are going to Maine. Leaves. I let Jason know the dates, they're in line with their fall breaks, no worries, and he basically said we need to start including Daisy. Jenny's parents made some bad investments, they're fine but aren't helping them out anymore, and Jenny is looking for a job, but since her parents had always paid for their trips they can't go on one this year. So, even if all was fair, I wouldn't want to take Daisy on a trip. This is going to shock you with parents like that, and I feel so bad saying this about a child, but Daisy is a huge brat, spoiled, mean, and constantly bragging about the things she gets that her siblings don't. She once told me they weren't her siblings, they were Tiffany's kids. She throws toddler-level tantrums on holidays if she doesn't get as much and more as the other kids, tells my wife and I we are going to hell. Edit, I now feel bad for including this. She said it about 5 years ago a few times, and when Jenny was told, it was about the only time I've ever seen her discipline Daisy. I guess she'd heard it from Jenny's aunt, but it was hurtful and hard to forget with everything else, and, since Jenny waits on her hand and foot, she's a total slob. I feel bad saying all this. I hope when she grows up she grows out of it. But there is no way I'd want to take her on a vacation. So I told him I didn't think we'd be able to handle all 4 kids and we'd just go the 5 of us. He said Jenny could come to help out. Absolutely not, or our mom could go. Love her, but she's getting a freaking hip replacement next month and does not want to go. Plus the car we'd need for all these people on a road trip would be stupid. We'd probably need 2, and you know what? I don't want 2. Anyways, sorry for trauma dumping on you all, this is getting long. I was worried Jason would not let me take the other kids on the trip, but they decided to go the route of shaming us online. Obviously it's working with their friends and her family, but even my dad told me to stick to my guns. But my wife came to me the other day and basically said, are we even better than Jenny if we're favoring some kids over another just because we don't like their mom? Before we were evening things out, but now we're obviously favoring the oldest. She told me to think of the long-term health of my family and our relationships. She said that it's my family, my decision, but wants me to think about it. My gut is saying just take the older 3, but Daisy is only 10, she's not to blame. Would it make me an evil aunt to leave her out? Update 1. She can be a brat, but she is also funny and caring. She's the only grandchild who is stuck with the church choir that my mom runs, even though I don't think she loves it. Always calls my wife and I on our birthdays, and when their dog was too old to go upstairs, she brought her mattress downstairs and slept next to her every night before she passed away so she wouldn't be lonely. People aren't cartoon villains, and please stop attacking a 10-year-old. Sorry I didn't reply to direct messages. I don't feel comfortable doing that. I don't know if that account people were messaging me was Jenny's, and honestly it wouldn't change anything. I did change some small things for anonymity, and it would be a shame if there more than one person out there like her. Finally, just a reminder that I live half the world, a 15-hour Maine plane ride away. I can't just pop over, and there are time zone issues. I also do well for myself but don't have unlimited money. So stop telling me to take Daisy on trial trips and buy a 4-bedroom house for the oldest 3 to live in Lowell. And keep in mind, I live in remote, mostly rural areas, not bustling metropolises with vibrant expat communities and international schools. It's the nature of my job, I've worked hard for it, and it's not conducive to having kids/young adults living with me. I'm not a messy person and I don't do social media drama, so I've been ignoring Jenny and Jason's little vague booking campaign, and honestly I wasn't even going to update until I got some background information, but basically I got a call from my brother last weekend and it was Daisy crying and telling me she would be good and she's sorry for being bad and she wants to go on the trip and promising she'll be quiet and not say anything rude. It was dark. She was saying she was going to find a way to show me and my wife and her parents she was good and not a bad person and everything would be okay. I tried calming her down. I assured her that both her aunts love her very much and don't think she is a bad person at all. My brother took the phone and was just like, "See what you've done," and hung up. I tried calling back, he didn't answer. I texted my mom as well as Jace and Jeff to see what was going on, and of course I wake up and there's a post about how cruel people can be to innocent children. Anyways, between my mom and Jeff I got some more background info. I don't know where all their money goes or what kind of bath her parents took, but their financial situation is bad. As in asking my fixed, low-income parents for money for Daisy's tuition bad. Obviously they couldn't help them, and I guess Jenny and my brother had told Daisy she was going to have to pick between vacation and her school, and she picked her school, but since it's taken Jenny longer than they expected to find a job they can no longer swing that either. I know you all think she's a little demon, but my heart broke for her with that. And yes, I am not getting into it, I'll rage for too long, but yes, the older 3 have always gone to public school. I do think it was Jenny's parents paying the tuition, though, and according to Jeff, Daisy is getting older and having more of her own opinions and Jenny doesn't like that. When she found out she couldn't go back to her school she asked about a trip, and when my brother told Jenny I'd said no, she told Daisy she couldn't go because she was bad. Heartbreaking, and just generally A+ parenting all around. I don't think this is the end of all of this. Jeff needs to be more discreet but told me Jenny was losing it because of Botox and Ozempic withdrawal. He did say the house wasn't as bad as you'd think, she mostly ignores them and has continued that. He works and Hannah has spent most the summer at her best friend's house. Also, one quick thing, I know everyone is worried about my nephews and niece and think they live horrible, miserable lives, and this vacation is the only bright spot of the year. Yes, their lives are completely unfair and I feel awfully for them, but they are happy kids. From what Jace has told me, since she had Daisy they've always kind of just treated Jenny like an eccentric roommate that their dweeb of a dad is sleeping with. Update 2. I decided I wasn't making big family decisions at midnight while my niece was sobbing on a phone Jason dialed for her. I slept on it, talked to my wife in the morning over burned toast and weirdly sweet instant coffee, and then called Hannah. She was at her best friend's house, had to walk out to the front yard because the dog was doing zoomies inside, and said, very calmly, that Daisy had heard Jenny tell Jason I'd punished her and that's why Daisy called me. She also said Daisy had started keeping a good list, like literal gold stars for herself, because good girls get to go to Maine, and if that sentence didn't make you want to drive a car into the ocean I don't know what will. I asked to talk to Daisy. She answered in a whisper like she thought someone would take the phone out of her hand. I told her plain and simple that she is not a bad kid, has never been a bad kid, and that A, it's not her job to prove anything to me, and B, adults are not supposed to dangle love like a prize. I also told her I wasn't deciding anything over the phone with her crying, and that I would call her back later that day at a set time and we would talk about what she wanted out of the fall that had nothing to do with being good. She said like what, and I said like what would be fun for you even if nobody posted about it after. She laughed at that, which is a good sign. We made a plan to talk at 6 on Hannah's phone. Then I called Jason. He picked up like he'd been waiting for the chance to perform outrage and said, "So you made my daughter cry." I told him he made his daughter cry when he let Jenny tell her she was bad. He said I was gatekeeping family, which is a phrase I did not know men in their 40s used, and then he tried the leverage I knew he'd try, which was Hannah. He said if I was excluding his youngest, he couldn't in good conscience let me take his 12-year-old across state lines. I told him to Google conscience and hung up. My dad called 20 minutes later in that low, calm tone he uses right before he flips a table. He said Jason was being an idiot and he'd go over. Half an hour later I get a photo from Jace of a permission form with my name misspelled, signed, and dated, sitting on the kitchen table next to a half-eaten avocado and a syringe pen cap. I asked Jace what the cap was. He said Jenny was on a break from everything and the house was very hydrated, which is his way of saying there are a lot of water bottles everywhere and no actual food. He also said to please keep Maine as Maine because it's the 1 week they don't have to ask permission to open the fridge. I kept Maine as Maine. At 6, I called Daisy back. She was all business, clutching a notebook like we were negotiating a treaty. I told her that the Maine trip was the older threes tradition and it was staying that way this year, but that I wanted to plan something with her that wasn't a consolation prize, wasn't if you're good, and wasn't me trying to make anyone jealous. I asked what she'd do if she had a Saturday with 2 grown women who did not mind getting wet hair and didn't make her clean up immediately after a project. She said bake something that is complicated and sticky and go see sharks. Sharks I could do. Complicated and sticky I could definitely do. We blocked out the second weekend in November for an Aunt Day, and I told her I'd send her something in the mail so she'd have something to open that wasn't an envelope with a bill. She said, "Is it okay if I tell Grandma? Because she's happy when I have a plan." I told her to tell Grandma. Then I called my mom, who was sitting with an ice pack under her thigh and 3 church ladies loudly discussing potato salad nearby. She started crying in that quiet way that makes you feel like the worst person in the world because she said, I was watching her write good and bad in a little box and she is 10. I told her about November. She said she'd put it on her big calendar in cursive. She also told me Jason had tried bringing over a tuition bill that afternoon like my parents' moonlight as Wells Fargo, and my dad had finally said the thing he was waiting to say, which is that if they had the money they still wouldn't pay for it because they were done funding a hierarchy. My mother said he actually used the word hierarchy. Go Dad. 2 days later, I found out Daisy wasn't going back to the private school regardless. There were emails from the school about outstanding fees preventing matriculation, and in a stroke of cosmic comic timing, the choir director at their church copied my mom on a message about fall uniform fittings for the public middle school choir. My mother called me to ask if they should tell Daisy first or let Jason do it. I said grandmother's privilege. She took Daisy out for ice cream, told her she'd be riding the bus with Hannah and that the middle school had a robotics club, and Daisy said, very seriously, "Do I wear the uniform for that?" My mom said no and Daisy relaxed by about 4 inches. Jason did his own announcement later that night, which, according to Jeff, was mostly about how public school builds grit and how his own father never paid for private school for him and look how he turned out. Jeff texted me, "Yeah Dad, we're all aspiring to be emotionally broken line cooks for our wives." He immediately followed it with "sorry that was mean," and then a photo of Daisy curled up on the couch with Hannah drawing a bus route, which made me a little feral. Hannah had drawn a heart next to their stop and wrote "sit with me or I fight someone." She's 12. I wish I'd been that kid. Jenny started melting down the moment the school thing became real. She posted a photo of a packed lunch and wrote some long caption about seasonal transitions and changes we didn't choose. Jace sent me a video of Jenny attempting to iron a polo with a blow dryer, which you'd think was a joke but is in fact just our life. He also told me Daisy asked if she should hide her old school sweatshirt. He told her to put it on his bed and he'd keep it safe there, which is such an older brother move. My throat went tight. The money thing is worse than I thought. It turns out that when Jenny stopped working it wasn't a short pause, it was years. Her parents were covering not just the vacations but Daisy's tuition, her car, and what I'm guessing were a dozen little subscriptions for skin and fitness and whatever else. Those are all gone. She has been applying for jobs, but the ones she thinks she deserves aren't calling back, and the ones that are calling back are restaurants and retail. She went to one training shift at a boutique and came home because the lighting was hostile. Meanwhile, Jason is still working 6 days a week and sleeping with his phone under his pillow like a teenage drug dealer. I asked him, again, where the money goes, and he made a noise like a tea kettle. My dad thinks there's a credit card pile somewhere. I think there's a hole they jump over when they walk through the hallway. There was a 24-hour period where it looked like the whole Maine thing was going to implode because Jenny told Daisy to tell me she could help be my extra set of hands on the trip. I said no, and Jenny actually called me for the first time in a year and said, "It's funny that I'm good enough to watch your kids but not my own." She forgot for a second that none of these kids are mine and that's still not my problem. I told her, verbatim, that I am not bringing a child who has just been told she is responsible for being good enough for a vacation on a trip that exists precisely so 3 other kids don't have to perform. She said I was unwell, and I said, possibly, but I have refundable tickets, and then we both sat in silence for a second like we were listening to our better angels leave the room in disgust. She hung up on me. 10 minutes later I got a text from Daisy asking if she could make my mom a casserole after her surgery because she read you're supposed to bring casseroles to women who had babies and hips are kind of like the baby of your leg. I told her absolutely yes and that it would be the most important casserole ever made. She asked if we could make a schedule for the oven. I said I'd talk to Grandma's church ladies who basically have a spreadsheet for grief, joy, and orthopedic interventions. Because I am not totally heartless, I did 2 practical things. I ordered Daisy a little box of things from Maine, maple candies shaped like leaves, a postcard with a lighthouse, a child's guide to tide pooling, and one of those ridiculous touristy pressed flower kits with wax paper and straps, so she'd have something to open that was clearly from me and clearly not something I bought in the checkout aisle. And I called the middle school counselor, because I am listed as Daisy's emergency contact and because I wanted to make sure someone at school knows there's a kid showing up out of a private school bubble into a big public building carrying a good and bad list she made herself. The counselor was kind in the way that turns your heart inside out. She asked if Daisy had any person in the building she could anchor to. I said Hannah, obviously. The counselor said she'd put them in the same lunch if she could. I also told her I'd pay for Daisy's activity fee for a club if they had one she was interested in, and I would do the same for Hannah and Jeff, and had already paid for Jace's park pass because he hikes to not throttle anyone. She said that was fair and reasonable and that she wishes more aunts called ahead. If you're going to accuse me of favoritism, at least let it be the equitable kind. My wife and I set up one account we both contribute to that is for kids stuff that isn't rent or tuition. It's for instruments, cleats, SAT fees, choir trips, and weird middle school robotics kits that make your cat cry. I told the 3 older kids what it was for and told Daisy separately. I said yes, separate, and no, not secret, but I wanted to make sure she had things that were hers and not framed like the extras Daisy gets if she's perfect. She breathed out in that way she does like a cartoon balloon. Hannah helped Daisy pick out a backpack that doesn't look like it belongs to a child bride. They went to Target with my mom, and I got a string of photos that told a little story. Daisy holding up a neon pink monstrosity, Hannah shaking her head slowly, Daisy making a face, Hannah pointing to a deep green one, Daisy rolling her eyes and putting it on and then refusing to take it off while she tried on sneakers. In one picture she is checking herself in the mirror and you can see my mom in the background, crying. I saved them all. If you think I'm being sentimental, fight me. The first day of school, Jeff called me from the bus stop. He never calls. He said, "Hey, just in case you hear about it later and your brain eats itself first, I wanted you to know that Jenny told Daisy not to smile too much because it looks like she's happy about public school." Then he went quiet and said, "And Daisy smiled anyway." I said good. He said, "Also, Daisy asked if public school has Spirit Week, and I said it probably does." He said, "Well, this week is apparently Spirit Week at home, because I'm not getting yelled at for breathing today and I'm going to ride that into the sunset." He hung up because the bus came. Maine is booked, room squared away, the rental car is the size of a small moon and I've already had one argument with a park ranger on email about whether a map from 2017 is still relevant. Jace's work was weirdly flexible because his supervisor is in his 40s and also from the Midwest and said leaf peeping is a nature right. Jeff lined up his shifts and asked me if it'd be okay to splurge on a stupidly expensive burger he saw on Instagram one night if he paid me back after his next paycheck, and I said, "You've spent the last 8 years watching other people eat dessert in front of you. Eat the burger." Hannah keeps sending me photos of the outfits she's considering for the Lighthouse Day and then immediately following it with a picture of her in sweatpants and a hoodie because this is who I really am. She is 12 going on 60. Jason is sulking but mostly quiet, because my father went to his house and told him, in front of the dishwasher that still isn't installed, that if he made one more manipulative comment to Daisy about being good that he would personally accompany him to therapy every Wednesday at noon until the heat death of the universe. I do not know what happened in the moment, but I do know my dad came home with a box of old photographs and a look on his face like he just exorcised a small demon with a sponge and a paring knife. Jenny is still on her tier. She came to my parents' house with a binder labeled schedule that was blank inside except for a piece of paper that said "We are a team" in gold gel pen. My mother put it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a cow and said, "We are eating at 5, and Jenny left with the binder. There's one more thing, and I'm only including it because it matters for the way the next few months will go. Jace got offered a permanent position after his internship. It's not a fortune, but it's steady, decent hours, and the boss knows he has siblings and told him, family stuff comes up, we'll make it work." He cried on the phone to me on a Tuesday on his lunch break with a bag of pretzels in his hand and said, "I can move out." I said, in a very calm voice that did not match what my insides were doing, that he could take his time, plan, not martyr himself, and that when he did it, he should choose a place with a pull-out couch and an extra fork. He said, 2 forks if Jeff can afford to split it. I said, 3 forks for when Hannah decides she needs to do her homework on your kitchen table. We both laughed in the staccato way you laugh when you're trying not to cry in public. Daisy is not going to Maine. She knows that, and she knows it's not because she is bad, and she has something to look forward to in November that we planned together that has nothing to do with anybody else's mood. Hannah already wrote Aunt Day on the big calendar in bubble letters. I sent Daisy her box. She FaceTimed me while opening it and asked if she was allowed to press leaves that were gross. I told her gross leaves are often the most interesting. She said, "Like people," and then we both got quiet for a second and she said, "Can I bring Grandma?" I said yes if Grandma wants to come, and if Grandma can get up the aquarium stairs in her state we'll carry her like Cleopatra. I would love to tell you that the adults in this situation adjusted their behavior in any meaningful, sustained way because a 10-year-old drew boxes that said good and bad. They did not. Jason is a coward who does what keeps the noise down. Jenny is a cauldron with a ring light. But the kids are making their own ecosystem. Hannah has positioned herself as the emotional air traffic controller. Jeff is doing overtime and buying groceries when he can and making sure Daisy eats something green twice a week. Jace is making a plan to move out that includes an extra fork. My mom has a surgery date and a 3-page meal schedule with Daisy's casserole in all caps. My dad is practicing being the person who says no out loud in the living room instead of just in the garage. And my wife ordered a silicone shark cake mold that is currently in my suitcase because complicated and sticky is a promise, and I keep those. We leave in 2 weeks. I will send postcards to a middle school with a new counselor who knows there's a kid with a green backpack and a sister with a Sharpie. I will not answer any more calls where a grown man tries to hand me a crying child like an apology. I will take 3 kids to look at leaves until their eyes ache with color. And in November I will come back and stand in front of a tank of lazy circling sharks with a little girl who thinks hips are the babies of legs, and we will eat something so sweet it sticks to our teeth, and we will not perform for anybody. Update 3. Maine looks like somebody left the crayon box on the dashboard and the whole thing melted into the trees. The air tastes like you rinsed your mouth with pine needles. The rental car was the size of a barge and beeped at me every time I breathed wrong. Jeff named it the float and patted the dashboard like a horse whenever it made a noise it didn't understand. Hannah wore boots on day 1, hated them by lunch, and then refused to take them off the rest of the week because I've committed to a bit. Jace sat in the passenger seat and did the thing where you lean forward when you're excited and pretend you're not. I handed out maps like a magician doing a trick I'd practiced, and a park ranger named Dave told me, very gently, that my 2017 map was historical now and handed me a new one with the trails circled in a grandfatherly way that made me briefly consider buying him a pie. Hannah asked if we were going to see a moose with the same tone you use when you ask Siri a naughty question, and when I said probably not, she adjusted her imaginary beret and said, we'll manifest. Jeff started keeping a tally of how many times she said manifest, and every time she did, he said poof under his breath like a low-budget warlock. Jace took pictures of rocks and then pretended he didn't when anyone got near his phone. On our first climb, the wind hit us sideways and I had that moment that always happens when I take the 3 of them somewhere, the one where I realize how quiet joy can be. No one had to be the good one or the easy one. Hannah sang into her scarf until she fogged her own glasses and then declared herself a pioneer who needed cocoa by law, and we found a shack that sold hot drinks and donuts, and I told Jeff to buy the stupidly expensive burger he'd shown me, and when it arrived it looked like a science project with a toothpick for a flag. He closed his eyes for the first bite like he was getting baptized. He handed half to Jace, and the way Jace said thanks made me want to put a table in front of that shack and stand guard over it like a dragon for the rest of my life. We sent postcards to the middle school addressed to Daisy and her counselor, and Hannah drew a lopsided lighthouse that looked like it was actively trying to run away. The first one said leaves are show-offs, wish you were here, and the second one said grandma says casserole Monday, and then, for no reason at all, sharks are patient, which Hannah underlined 3 times. I got a photo back the next day from Jace of Daisy holding the postcards like a scoreboard, green backpack on, hair pulled into 2 buns that made her ears look brave. The counselor had taken her to the office to read them because, in her words, mail at school is a sacrament. Daisy sent a text that simply said, manifesting hot cocoa. The only real hiccup was a call from my mother that started with I'm fine, which is, as you know, code for I am upright, but nothing in my house is where it is supposed to be. Her hip went clanky after church choir and she needed help moving the step stool, which I later learned meant she needed someone to stand between her and Jason while she told him he was not moving the stool the way she liked. Jace handled it. He slipped out one morning at dawn, got her settled with an ice pack and 4 Baptists, and was back by lunch with a bag of bagels and a look on his face like he'd done battle with a very gentle dragon in one. Jenny tried one volley. She texted me on Lighthouse Day a photo of Daisy staring at her plate with the caption, "Do you ever think about how kids remember who forgot them?" Like she'd invented guilt. I looked at my wife, who raised an eyebrow, and then I put my phone in the glove compartment and went outside to be slapped in the face by salt air that makes you feel like you're being forgiven for something specific. Later that night, I wrote Daisy, "We saw water pretend to be glass." She wrote back, "Our bus driver plays the radio quiet and it feels like a secret." I said, "Save me a seat." She said, "Already did." On the 3rd day, the light went thick and gold at 4 o'clock, and it was one of those unphotographable hours where everything looks like it's been dipped in tea. We climbed to a place where the ocean made that sound like someone breathing in the other room, and I turned around to outlaw an argument about granola bars and found Hannah with her hand on a railing, looking at the horizon like it had told her a joke. She said, without looking at me, "I don't want to be the person who is always okay," and then she took her hand away and said, "Anyway," and asked if she could get a hoodie that said Bay on it because she liked how the letters felt. I said okay, and she wore it for the next 3 days and slept in it on the plane home with the hood up like a monk. Jace told me about the job offer by a trailhead with a sign that warned us not to feed anything with a heartbeat. He had the email open on his phone and he kept backing out of it like it might run away. I said I would help with first and last month if he needed it, and he said, politely, no, and then, in a much smaller voice like his mouth wasn't sure if it should let it out, maybe the deposit. I said yes in that flat, nonchalant tone Midwestern people use when they mean I would mail you my spleen if you asked. Jeff came over and bumped his shoulder and said, "Pick a place with sunlight," and then immediately added, "No reason," and then turned around and picked up a piece of sea glass and said, "Too loud, this is trash that thinks it's fancy," and I started laughing so hard I had to sit down on a rock while a French-Canadian toddler stared at me like I was a public warning. We found a tide pool and saw a crab who seemed to think if he didn't move very much he would become a rock, and Hannah took off one boot to stand in the water and then yelped and put it back on and scowled at the ocean as if it had broken an agreement. We pressed the first leaf into the silly little strap press and Hannah wrote in Sharpie, on the piece of cardboard it came with, "Gross is interesting." I sent Daisy a photo and she answered with a picture of her bus stop and said, "There's a crow who looks at me like he knows my name." I am telling you all of this because nothing dramatic happened. The most dangerous thing we encountered was a bee with an agenda and a man at a tourist stand who tried to sell Jeff a t-shirt that said life is better in flip-flops, and Jeff said, in the most sincere voice I have ever heard him use, "For whom?" It was a week where the loudest sound was kids laughing with their mouths closed so they did not make anybody mad. When we left, the woman at the front desk of the motel with the tiny lighthouse lamp said take care of each other, and Jace said we will, and she nodded like he'd passed a test she gave all young men without telling them. Back home, the school year had gotten its hooks into Daisy. The counseling office called to say she'd asked where she should line up to audition for choir because she thought you had to try out to be allowed to sing in a big room. The counselor said she told Daisy everyone can sing in a big room, and Daisy cried quietly with her face turned to the left. They put her and Hannah in the same lunch, as promised, and apparently the first day, a girl with a hair clip shaped like a strawberry asked if Daisy liked robotics or art, and Daisy said, "I like making things that still look like themselves after," which is such a first draft sentence for a life I almost laid down on the kitchen floor to look at the ceiling. Jenny's response to public school came in waves of performative competence. She posted a photo of a homemade lunch that contained 3 grapes, a package of crackers, and a motivational note that said be a pineapple, which Daisy later informed me she put in her pencil pouch because she thought it might be important on a test. She told Daisy not to smile too much in the hall. Daisy smiled anyway and told Hannah in the car that smiling in a hall makes the hall less long. Hannah said, "One time I smiled at a science poster and it started to respect me," and Daisy said, "I think that's manifesting," and Hannah whispered poof. My mother had her hip surgery and handled it like a woman who has given birth to a choir. The first day home she held court in the recliner with a fleece blanket that I swear she knit out of other people's compliments. Daisy immediately set about making the casserole. She arrived with a printout titled lasagna for someone who had a baby hip and a grocery list that included noodles that look tired and tomato sauce that thinks it's famous. She had me on FaceTime, propped against a jar of pickles, to consult when the sauce got bossy. She put it in the oven and made a schedule for who stood at the window to watch it in case something dramatic happened. Jeff came by with a bag of spinach and sat on the counter and flicked the light with his foot and said, "Just so you know, in this family we season with sarcasm and garlic," and Daisy said, "I'm putting that on my locker." The casserole came out as a sort of pasta cake with ambitions. My mother cried, which triggered the entire casserole plan for the next month like a Rube Goldberg machine of caring. Daisy wrote her name on the big calendar in bubble letters with a star, and every time someone brought over something with a crust, she stood very straight when she carried it to the table like she was delivering a jewel. Aunt Day almost derailed the way these things always do, which is with a text that at first looks like it's about something neutral. Jenny announced that Daisy needed to come to an etiquette celebration at the private school where they give awards for leadership to the girls whose families owed less than 4 months' tuition, which is not an award as much as it is a color-coded invoice. Daisy thought it was mandatory because it came in an email full of bold words, the kind of email that makes you feel like there's a 9-year-old grammar cop in your house. I was standing at the sink when my dad called and said, "Come over," the way a surgeon tells you to sit. He had the printer copy of the invite in one hand and Daisy's planner in the other. Daisy had written Aunt Day in blue with a wobbly heart and then, in pencil, "Unless I am bad," and then erased it so hard she'd torn the paper. My dad, who does not do theater, was suddenly doing a one-man show called Boundaries, a revival. He told Jason, in front of the stairwell photograph of our family dressed like a denim ad, that Daisy was going with me, that there was no etiquette award that trumped her calendar, and that if he tried anything underhanded he would be surprised at how many people in this town remembered Jason at 13 stealing nails from the hardware store and how none of them would pretend to be shocked now. Aunt Day happened. I flew back on a Thursday, slept for 4 hours, and woke up to the sound of my wife calculating the conversion from grams to cups like she was defusing a bomb. Daisy met us at my parents' house in the green backpack and a hoodie she had written on in Sharpie under the hem, "Good is not a prize." She had a list of sharks, printed and highlighted, and a list of sticky prospects, which included marshmallow frosting, a thing inexplicably called fluffernut or bark, and something she invented named treasure teeth that was pretzels dipped in white chocolate with sprinkles that looked like aquarium gravel. We made all of it. There was sugar on the ceiling and we left it there on purpose because sometimes you need a comet tail in the kitchen. The aquarium was a miracle of human ingenuity and underpaid teenagers. Daisy pressed her nose to the glass with both hands, which immediately fogged, and a small boy next to her said, "Don't do that," and she said, without looking at him, "Sometimes the glass needs to know I'm real." We stood in front of the big tank and watched the sharks do their lazy, efficient laps, and she whispered facts at me like secrets. She said, "Nurse sharks are my favorite because they mind their business," and I said, "Mine too," and a volunteer in a blue vest who had obviously been alive since God was a boy nodded like a rabbi. My mother, gloriously on her walker with tennis balls, came as far as the jellyfish before declaring that these are church-like and then sat and let Daisy narrate the ocean. Daisy bought a postcard with a whale on it for Hannah, a sticker that said "Science is real" for Jeff, and a keychain shaped like a shark tooth for Jace, and she wrote their names in careful letters on the back of each thing and said, "This is not to make them sad," and I said, "It won't." There was a moment at the touch tank where Daisy froze. A Ray came by with that strange sweet face, and the volunteer who looked like a youth pastor with a shell necklace said, 2 fingers, and Daisy didn't move. She said, without looking at me, what if I do it wrong? I said, then the Ray will swim away and later you can try again. And she nodded and put her 2 fingers in the water, and when the Ray brushed her she made a sound like a gasp and then started laughing with her whole body, and the teenager in the vest put his hand over his heart, like he'd just watched a conversion. Afterwards we went home and baked the shark cake, and it came out with one fin bent, which made it look like it had been in one fight and lost and was now a better person. Daisy iced it with the concentration you usually only see on surgeons and serial killers, and then announced that we were going to write the names of people who do not require performances on the platter. We wrote Grandma's name, and my wife's, and she wrote mine, and then she wrote me and underlined it so hard you could see the impression on the tablecloth. Then she took the good list out of her backpack and folded it into a paper boat and floated it in the sink until it sank, and when it did she patted it like a small animal and said, "We're not doing that anymore," and then she ate a piece of cake the size of her hand. On the big family front, Jason has begun the world's slowest faceplant into therapy. My dad is still going with him to the Wednesday appointment because the pretense that he is just giving a ride keeps Jason from bolting. The therapist is a woman with hair the color of a raincloud who, according to my father, does not suffer phrasing. She told Jason that keeping Jenny happy was just the cheap way of saying afraid, and my father said he nearly stood and clapped. We're not throwing parades. But on Sunday Jason came by with a new coffee maker for my mom and installed it without making a speech about it, which is progress in the same way a tiny sprout is proof there's a root somewhere you can't see. Jenny oscillates between tearful and performatively industrious. She cleaned the pantry at my parents' house and arranged the canned goods by color and then left a note on the toaster that said, "We are grateful," which my dad moved to the freezer on purpose, because he knows she hates effort that isn't appreciated properly. She also told Daisy that I was the reason your life is complicated, and Daisy, God bless her, said, "No, that would be capitalism," which sent Hannah into a wheeze that needed to be contained with a thrift store inhaler. There are still syringes caps in the wrong places and water bottles multiplying like guppies. But also there are dinners where the older 3 eat together unbothered and Daisy steals Jeff's fries and he lets her, and when she gets up to refill Hannah's drink without being asked, Jenny opens her mouth to comment and then closes it again because my father is in the corner of the kitchen and he somehow looks like a sheriff without wearing a badge. Jace found a place. It's a 3rd-floor walk-up with windows that look like they've considered quitting and then decided to give it one last semester. The stove is not so much vintage as historical, and the bathtub has feet, which made Hannah declare that she was going to ascend to some kind of level by reading in it with a book and a plate of grapes. The landlord is a widow named Loretta who talked to Jace and Jeff for 20 minutes and then said, "I raised 2 boys with a hammer and a Bible. I can handle late rent if it's honest," which is the kind of sentence that either saves your life or makes you join a cult. The deposit got paid out of the account my wife and I set up, and Jace Venmo'd me $14.82 with a note that said for the soap because he is too proud to start small any other way. He puts keys in his pocket like they might fly away. Jeff ran the numbers and is going to move in after the new year if his hours hold. Hannah announced that she will be visiting faculty and will grade their fridge. Daisy tries on how to be a person who belongs. She picked robotics. The club is a bunch of kids who smell like pencil shavings and gum, supervised by a math teacher whose hair is held up with a pencil and 2 prayers. The first day Daisy came home and announced, "I'm good at not making jokes when I am not sure yet," which is a sentence that makes me think she will run a lab one day. She also sat with a girl at lunch whose shoes were held together with duct tape and told my mom later when my mom asked that no, the girl's shoes were not sad, they were interesting. She helped Hannah make a sign for the church rummage sale that said "Gently Used Faith," and my mom had to hide in the pantry to laugh. We are not fixed. Everyone still flinches before they read a text. I still keep my passport and a toothbrush in the same pocket because that's what my life is. Jason is still a man who believes that if he appeases he is safe. Jenny still thinks a schedule printed in gold gel pen is the same thing as a plan. But the ground is different. There is a casserole with a star next to it on a calendar that is not moving for anybody. There is a green backpack hanging on a hook that has a Leo sticker on it that says half sister, half scientist, which Daisy made on a school computer and printed and then waited to put on until Hannah told her it looked right. There is a lease with Jace's name on it and a bathtub with feet and an extra fork in the drawer. There is a teenager eating a burger that costs too much because for once no one asked him to prove he deserved it. There is a 12-year-old who decided she doesn't have to be okay to be allowed to want things, and a 10-year-old who wrote me an icing next to other people's names and called it a list. The last night before I flew back, Daisy asked if she could press leaves from our yard into the little strap book and then asked, very seriously, if she could press a grocery receipt. I said, "That will make the whole house smell like apples and bank fees," and she said, "I like things that smell like they know what things cost." We pressed it anyway. We put it between 2 red maple leaves and the next morning it looked like art if you squinted. When I left for the airport, she hugged me around the waist with her face in my coat and said, "When is the next thing that we are doing that is not about being good?" And I said, "Soon," and my mom, behind her, mouthed the word sooner and pointed at the calendar like she was a stage manager for a very specific, very stubborn show. I got on a plane and watched the video Hannah took of the sharks making slow loops, my mother's laugh in the background like wooden spoons knocking softly together, and I thought, not for the first time this year, that maybe we are not the kind of family that gets better in pronouncements. Maybe we are just the kind that gets better in casseroles, and maps that someone else gently replaces, and text messages about bus radios, and an extra fork, and a list that says me and nobody claps because nobody needs to.